welcome to Bombay. You were just, when we were chatting up, you said this is your first time in Bombay. So welcome to Bombay and welcome back to India as well. Let's get started. What are you seeing as the new developments, as the new trends? What is so engaging for you now for Binance in India? Where all, from a regulatory perspective, have you progressed? What are the things that you're really liking in the country right now?
Thank you. Firstly, good evening to everyone who's attended this event. Thank you for your presence. It means a lot to us here at Binance, and a pleasure to be on stage with you as well. So let me attack the questions in a number of ways, right? Some of the panelists before have shared that India leads the pack when it comes to digital asset adoption. Let's put some statistics on that. APAC as a whole has a 69 to 70% growth year on year. Is that clear at the back? Better now? Okay. So APAC has a 69 to 70% growth rate year on year when it comes to digital asset adoption. India for the last 3 years has been the leader globally in digital asset adoption. So what that means is if you compute the two together, India's at the top end of that range, right? And this is a trend that's going to continue well into the future. So that's the first area of interest for us. As a business, that's obviously an area of interest to us. Binance is a digital asset ecosystem. So we've moved past the stage of being a core trading platform. Now we are a full-scale ecosystem. And India is one of the countries where we want to entrench ourselves into the future, I should say. What's attractive by India is also the fact that there's multiple angles of this, right? From a labor participation perspective, Rachel shared earlier, our CMO shared earlier, that it has 11 to 12% of contribution to total global developer pools. Now that number obviously could be a lot higher if the ecosystem could soak up that capacity. It's a demand and supply issue, isn't it? So there's labor supply, but the question is whether there's enough demand for that labor. So that's another area of fascination for us. If we could collaborate and if we could contribute transparently to building that ecosystem, then there's going to be a net benefit to the development of this labor pool and the number of developers who could contribute to this, and that would be a domestic asset. I think the other half of your question, I think, was what has been the regulatory approach for us?
Yeah.
Now, we are currently licensed in 22 countries around the world, and these are full-scale digital asset operating licenses. These are not AML registrations only, right? And as Rachel shared earlier, we're present in about 100 different countries from an operational perspective. Coping with regulations is our bread and butter. We do this day in, day out. We've done this day in, day out for the last 8 years and have grown to be the world's largest digital asset exchange. To give you a sense for that, we have processed $150 trillion worth of digital assets in the last 8 years. We clear close to 1.5 million transactions a second. And we've done that at scale. We've done that while keeping customer assets safe. We've done that responsibly, and we've been an ecosystem partner to hundreds and potentially thousands of startups around the world in this space. So that's basically been our entry point and our approach to regulation, our approach to India, and what we hope are our long-term aspirations for India.
So you believe India is truly Web 3.0 ready right now, as we speak?
India has dipped her toes into Web 3.0 from a architecture perspective. And then there is the demographic perspective, right? Indian users hold currently about 5 to 10 billion conservative estimates in digital assets, and that number is going to grow to 30 billion in the next 3 to 5 years. So if you ask me whether the ship has sailed on Indians' participation in digital assets, yes, the answer is yes. Right? The question is, how do we build a framework to accommodate for this in a way that provides clarity on what elements of digital assets are permitted, which have to have certain degrees of control, which are not permitted. That clarity, I think, is yet to come.
Perfect. I'll stay put on the point on clarity and maybe weave in another layer of, I'll go back to the point on regulations as well. Where do you think there needs to be a little more work to be done in terms of making India from a regulatory standpoint, bridging innovation and growth and bringing in new technologies, etc.? Where do you think we still have scope for improvement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get this a lot. And there's always underlying assumption that innovation and regulation, have a trade-off. It's not the case, right? Smart regulation actually fosters innovation. And so, and there are countries, so among G20 countries that took a position that digital asset adoption would be part of their national frameworks, most of them have proceeded down the path of smart regulation. What that looks like is basically activity-based licensing. there's usually a category of license, right, which is financial services licensing, but then it breaks down authorizations on activity basis. So if you take an exchange, there is a few components that are immediately clear-cut, right? There is the order book, that's the matching engine, there is clearing, there is settlement, there is custody, right? These are the basic foundational building blocks of any exchange. I'm just using an exchange as an example. Then you can break that down further into categories of participants, right? Dealer brokers, exchanges, custodians, OTC desks. So different jurisdictions have taken different approaches. But the end goal is you provide clarity when you start thinking about it this way. And I think that immediately gives you a signal. Okay, these are the activities that we want to kind of dive into from a service provider perspective. And then the end users of GP is a function of money supply and velocity, right? So let's use an example. I think it's easiest. Let's talk about the digitization of the rupee. Now, I'm agnostic as to what format you take. You can call yourself a CBDC, you can call yourself a private stablecoin, you can call yourself a rupee-backed token. There's lots of misconceptions in these categorizations, and I'll come to some of them later, but let's take that as a use case. One of the main reasons why the US has moved on the path of rehabilitating the approach to stablecoins, and the Genius Act in particular, is because it makes the US dollar, it provides greater velocity to the US dollar, right? You now have interoperable and programmable money that is backed one-to-one by your national currency that is going to become a means of settlement for global trade, right? Why do people use USD for global trade? Because it is the currency of settlement of choice. And so when you then digitize it and make it interoperable and programmable, you're just amplifying that effect, right? You're creating new avenues for your money to work and flow. And so if India were minded, as many other countries are looking into, to digitize your rupee, you're actually making it interoperable. You're making it a choice for settlement globally. Now, obviously for countries with capital controls and currency control considerations, you have to bear in mind the trade-offs. But there are ways to manage those risks, in my view, while allowing for the innovation component to foster. Just on that point, I mean, like, I think there was some discussion about what's a CBDC, what's a stable-coin, what's a rupee-backed token. And, I think we have to be mindful of the trade-offs, right? So a public-private partnership when it comes to launching a digital version of a currency has proven to be the most effective way to increase adoption. Now, CBDCs are talked about as a panacea of sorts, but there is also bank intermediation in CBDCs. When a central bank or a central bank entity issues CBDCs, where does commercial deposits go? Because CBDCs have to have yield, right, in order to have adoption. They have to have some returns. And if those returns are attractive, equally as attractive as commercial banks, then commercial bank deposits are going to flow into the CBDC architecture. Where does that leave commercial banks and their capacity to lend in credit cycles? So there is bank disintermediation even for CBDCs, right? It's not a problem that's only relevant to stablecoins. So I think my point is you have to choose your technologies bearing in mind the trade-offs. And part of what smart regulation does is understand those trade-offs and give people legitimate choices and control for risks. But again, if done correctly, none of this stifles innovation.
Absolutely. As APAC head, and you've seen various regions yourself, what are the 2 or 3 top-of-the-mind learnings that you believe are fit enough for you to implement in India, or India will benefit from those learnings?
Okay. So I think one thing we're seeing in APAC is the degree of specificity in conversations around how to build products. Right? So, and I think in India, the conversation is still stuck in, well, should we have only AML regulation or should we move past that? So the conversation is quite far behind. Australia, for example, is having a conversation as the role, and to bear in mind, Australia was also on an AML registration policy, right? And they've moved quite quickly through the Treasury bill, which is in exploratory draft format now, to a model where they're talking intelligently about, well, should custody, if I license someone for custody, does that mean the technical stack for custody needs to be onshore? Or is it just the entity that has the contractual obligation for custody that needs to be onshore? Right? In Hong Kong, they're having conversations about, well, we now license exchanges and brokers, but can we have a model where a broker could plug into an order book and a liquidity pool that's offshore? Right? And so these conversations are incredibly nuanced and incredibly advanced in other tier 1 markets around the world. And so I think that's the first learning. Second learning is that and this is not a conversation that's had enough. Like when you have conversations in India about compliance, sometimes it takes the tone of, well, that's only a situation in India. That's not true. It's a global standard, right? So we are a fully KYC platform everywhere around the world where we operate. And, and so I think the conversation needs to recognize that this is a base standard for the rest of the world, right? But there's much more to do on top. And the third conversation is, education, right? That's not talked about enough. Binance Academy, which is a non-profit arm of Binance, has 6-digit number of tutorials, webinars, documents, policy papers we put out every day, every week, every month, which is pure information and it's totally free. A lot of the information talks and trains people on the technical architecture first, because we talk a lot about the financial architecture, but unless you understand the technical architecture, you don't understand the product, right? So what is blockchain? What is a decentralized ledger technology? What are private keys and public keys? How does hashing work? How do you add blocks to a chain? Why are there different chains? What are bridges, right? What is an interoperable chain architecture? What are the challenges we haven't solved from a technical layer? All of these information is critical to understanding the base. And on top of the base, we built the financial architecture, right? So that is the third learning, is that the degree of knowledge and the degree of education needs to improve. And this is uniform across the world, and that's something we invest very heavily into. But in India specifically, I think you have a young population who are digital natives, and they will catch on quickly. But I think these avenues of training and learning have to be amplified.
Perfect. With these learnings and maybe a little more as well, do you see Binance really playing an integral role in India's digital revolution, building up the digital stack in the way we are envisaging? Do you see how do you see that whole narrative play out?
Yeah, no, we want to be present in this market. We want to be deeply entrenched in the market. We would benefit from regulatory clarity, as would the local operators and other exchanges around the world who have interest in India. And that regulatory clarity has to be able to guide business decisions on how deeply we integrate and entrench ourselves into India. But leaving that aside, I think where we want to contribute most, what are the twin macro drivers of digital asset adoption globally? First, it is a multi-asset model, right? More and more service providers are moving to a world where in a single interface, in a single UX, without having to jump between environments, you now can access not just crypto, but your suite of financial services products, right? And that's the merger of Web 2 and Web 3. Two, real-world asset tokenization, right? These are usually asset classes which are not available to the average person because they require intensive upfront capital to get access to. But if you could tokenize them, and to Beatrice's point, whether you tokenize them via digital native tokens or whether you establish a token layer on top of a digital asset class, existing asset class, doesn't actually matter. You give the everyday person a fractionalized asset that he can actually afford.
Absolutely. I know time's up, but the conversation won't be complete if I don't ask this question. Indian talent pool is ripe enough for the kind of aspects that you spoke about. Where do we enhance talent? And with the advent of AI, etc., how do you see this sort of play out?
Well, you've got a very young population, a very astute population, right? And a population that adapts to technology very quickly, right? 10 years ago when UPI was being formulated, and I used to work for another tech company at that point, there was disbelief that the project took off at the rate that it took off, right? And you basically leapfrogged an entire generation of technologies. And now it's the standard business case that you study in terms of how a nation can implement a technical solution at scale, right? Seamlessly for the most part. And so I think the future is bright for India. Now, what would be the catalyst for unlocking all of that latent energy, ambition, as the keynote speakers mentioned earlier, the ambition for Maharashtra to become a $1 trillion economy, the ambition for India to become the second largest economy by 2030s, depends on human capital. And pairing human capital with intellectual capital and with technical know-how, right? And we talk about AI as something distinct from humanness. It's not. Right, it has to be a symbiotic relationship for that to make sense, and so that is your greatest strength, I think. And time is on your side for now, but I think doing it in time, getting it done in time, executing at scale is going to be the game changer.
Lovely. I think we should wrap on that note. Thank you so much.
Thank you.